Windows 10 is a pretty reliable operating system, and its networks tend to work without too much intervention from you or administrators. But occasionally you might experience problems. If you do, use a logical procedure such as the following. First of all, determine the scope of the problem. Clearly, if only one user is affected as opposed to an entire department, for a start that's perhaps less urgent. And secondly, it tends to indicate something at that particular computer rather than something on the server side or something within the infrastructure. Next, verify or determine the IP configuration of the client that's experiencing the problem, so to make sure that the thing is correctly configured. You might use ipconfig to do that, or you might use the details button in the IP4 property page. Verify that the network's hardware configuration is appropriate. Make sure that everything's plugged in where it should be. Make sure that, that all the hubs are on. Make sure everything's connected where it ought to be connected. Then test communications. Typically, this will include verifying basic communications. That might mean using ping to send a packet to a server, bearing in mind that sometimes ping gives us false negatives because firewall configurations block ping packets. Check any routing and firewall configuration of the network, especially if something might have changed, if you've deployed a new application, for example. Test name resolution. It might be that you can communicate with a server, but you can't communicate to it by its name, in which case it may be a name resolution issue at the client, or it may be a name resolution at the server. And then test connectivity to specific applications on particular servers. You've got a number of troubleshooting tools to help with this. The Event Viewer collects information about system activity and stores it in event logs. So that's a good place to go and have a look to see if Windows has collected any errors that relate to the network problem your user is experiencing. Windows Network Diagnostics provides possible descriptions of an issue and suggests a potential solution. It actually works quite well in certain circumstances. You can access that from Network and Sharing Center. The ipconfig command line tool can be used with a number of different switches. ipconfig/all allows you to view the current configuration in detail. ipconfig/release and /renew allow you to troubleshoot DHCP by releasing an address and renewing an address. ipconfig/display DNS, flush DNS and register DNS allow us to troubleshoot name resolution by displaying the current name resolution cache, flushing the cache and registering the names of the local computer with a DNS server. Ping allows you to send a group of packets to a designated server by its IP address or by its name. Do remember that you can get false negatives. Tracert is used to determine the path that packets take to a particular target system. It's a bit like a ping in as much as it reports back and whether it's been successful to communicate, but it can go through routers and provide you information about which hop it took to get there, in other words, which routers it passed through. NSLOOKUP is used to troubleshoot name resolution. We'll take a look at that shortly. Path ping is a bit of a hybrid. It's similar to ping and it's similar to Tracert. So it provides more information than ping and in a different format to Tracert. And there are a number of Windows PowerShell commandlets that you can use to troubleshoot and test network connectivity. For the exam, you need to be familiar with those. Troubleshooting name resolution is interesting. Use the following procedure. First of all, clear the resolver cache. If you've already successfully resolved or failed to resolve a name, then that's in the cache and that's going to invalidate any subsequent tests. So whenever you do anything, clear the cache. You can do that with ipconfig/flushdns. Attempt to verify basic connectivity using an IP address. If you can communicate with the IP address, then you know the server that you're trying to connect to is online. Attempt to verify connectivity to a host name. If that fails, then you know, since step 2 worked, the server's online and it doesn't work with the host name, it suggests it is a name resolution problem. Now the thing to work out next is whether that's a client problem or a DNS server problem. So if you're not successful in step 3, edit the hosts file. This is a text file stored under Windows System 32 drivers etc. It's a simple text file, so you can edit it with Notepad, providing you've got permissions in that folder. And then you might enter in a host name and an IP address. That allows you to force the host name into the resolver cache. If that's successful, then we know that the client can actually perform the resolution, and it suggests there may be an issue with the DNS server. display the resolver cache to determine whether or not you've managed to resolve the server address, and then test the name server. That's the last step. Let's take a look at this. We're going to verify our IP configuration, test IP connectivity, and then test name resolution. So troubleshooting networks is often about just understanding what the configuration of a particular device is supposed to be. You can generally achieve that through the command prompt. By using ipconfig. On its own, it tells us quite a bit. We've got the IP address here, subnet mask, default gateway, and then some IP6 related information down the bottom here. If we need a bit more information, we can use ipconfig/all. And it tells us that we're using a DHCP server and what its IP address is and information about the lease and so on. If you're experiencing a DHCP problem, then try renewing the address. You can do that by using an ipconfig/renew. I usually drop the address first, release, then verify that the address has been dropped, ipconfig, it's not there anymore, clear the screen there, and then do an ipconfig/renew. It will now hopefully obtain an IP configuration from, in this case, the router rather than the DHCP server. There we go. So if we check, we should have a new lease obtained and lease expire information here. So that's one thing that you can do. The next thing possibly is to test communications to a remote host. So you might try pinging a host. Pinging the local loopback, ping 127001, verifies that the protocol stack is functioning correctly. So you should get a response. Effectively, you're pinging yourself. Then you might try pinging a particular server or interface. We get a reply, so communications are looking good. And then you might try to ping something that was in a different subnet somewhere. And then if you experienced a problem, you might determine that it was a routing issue that you needed to look at. Remember, ping is not that reliable. You sometimes get false negatives. That's to say, it's possible that a computer that you're trying to communicate with has blocked ICMP version 4 packets. We can also use Windows PowerShell to perform some of those commands. Use the get net IP address commandlet. You get similar information to what you see with ipconfig. Instead of ping, you can use test connection. And so on. So if you don't think you've got a basic IP configuration issue, then you might start to look at something like name resolution. Let's talk a bit about troubleshooting name resolution. The first thing to check with name resolution is to verify that the DNS client settings are configured correctly. Click on properties here. We can see that this is set to obtain the information dynamically, so we can check that either using ipconfig, or back in network and sharing, we can click on Ethernet and then click details, and it will show us here that the DHCP server is configured and what the name server is. So that's looking as if it's configured correctly. Trouble with troubleshooting name resolution is that sometimes the problem can be at the name server end. So you can perform a series of fairly reliable tests, either at the command prompt or using Windows PowerShell. The first thing to do is to attempt to communicate by using a name. If you can ping to a particular host by its IP address, then you know that it's online and it's accepting ICMP packets. If when you try to ping it by name it doesn't work, that suggests that there's a name resolution issue. If you do an ipconfig/display DNS, you can see the servers that are in the name resolution cache. Because this computer is online, there's quite a lot that are configured here. If you want to perform name resolution tests, you must clear the cache by using the ipconfig/flush DNS commandlet, and then you can verify that there's nothing in the cache, and then you can attempt to test a name again by, pinging it or establishing a connection to it. So if I opened up a web browser and attempted to communicate with the Microsoft web server, for example, then I would expect to see that information in the cache. Similarly, if you're using Windows PowerShell, you can use the get DNS client cache command to view the cache. There is nothing in there at the moment. And we can also use the clear DNS client cache commandlet to remove everything from the cache. So those are the equivalents of ipconfig/display DNS and ipconfig/flush DNS. If you want to test a particular name, in PowerShell you can use the resolve DNS name command and then enter a name. And it comes back and it tells you how it resolved that. You can see some information here about how it went around the process of resolving that, and it's giving us the results here. It's giving us an IP4 address and an IP6 address and so on. So we know that name resolution appears to be working to that server. We can do the equivalent from the command prompt by using the nslookup command. And we get an answer. You can also use nslookup with -D1 and -D2 switches, and you can also output the details of your query to a text file for later analysis. If after doing these tests you're still getting some problems with name resolution, then it may well be worth escalating to server team to take a look at the DNS server configuration. In the demonstration, you saw how to verify IP configuration, how to test IP connectivity, and how to test name resolution.